Hey guys, it is Chesley Lunday. I am so excited for you guys to be here today on the Chesley Lunday experience. We want to help you innovate like never before. And we got a guest, now a new friend, I think, because I got to meet his wife. His name is Warren Bird. You might have heard of him before. He's only written, 30 books, Warren? Is that about right? Can you hear me yet? This is live, so it happens. But yeah, Warren has written many books, and one of my favorite books is Breaking Growth Barriers. And he wrote that with Carl George. Then you wrote Hero Maker with Dave Ferguson. That was one of the other ones that I love. And then we just did a series on the emotionally healthy church. And I remember seeing you, Warren, as an author on that too. How are you doing today, sir? Can you hear me yet?
I can hear you. I am
There we go.
Sorry.
No, you're good. You're good. There we go. I was just talking to everybody about how half of my library are the books that you wrote. So, or at least co-wrote with the other guys.
I really apologize for not coming on early, figuring out.
No,
I've done so many webinars on, but I've never used this program before, and it wants me to add my social media and all that.
Yeah.
I apologize, but
you are okay. You are all right.
I couldn't give rebuttal to anything you said.
That's right. So there we go.
If it's nice.
I told him that you became a fast friend. I got to meet your wife already, so which is your better half. So that was cool.
You got it. You got it exactly.
So hey, I'm going to jump right in here. You have a new survey that you've been working on. It's called the New Faces of Church Planting. That's actually what we're going to talk about today. Would you tell us like why you guys felt that it was important to establish the survey and get all the research?
Yes. So let me give you three quick reasons. One is the book Viral Churches, Ed Stetzer and I did in 2010, which was researched in 2008 and 2009, which at the time was the largest study of church planting in North America. And a lot has changed. We've had a pandemic, the internet has taken off, society has changed. So it is way overdue to have an update of that. And second, ECFA, the Evangelical Council for Financial Accountability, has hundreds of members who do church planting.
Yeah.
And when I talked to different ones and said, wow, would you like to know the state of church planting today? They're like, oh, that would help us so much. And then, of course, anything ECFA does, we try to give to the broader church world. And so it'll help in that way. And as I talked with different leaders outside ECFA spheres, and I said, like Exponential, for example, would this help you to know, Exponential is trying to move from 8% replicating 7% today, all the way up to 18%. Would it help you to know whether new churches and new campuses are leading the way in that charge? And they're like, oh, that would be so good to know. So I had no problem coming up with questions, input, friends to publicize it. It ended up being a coalition of 50 denominations and networks, all recruiting to take this part in the survey. And we just an hour ago crossed 2,500 participants.
Yeah, wow, that's amazing.
But if you're listening, I need to hear your story too, and we'll tell you why in a minute.
Well, here, let me do this. I actually grabbed it from the email that you sent me. If you want to do the assessment, it's www.research.net/r/WBLI all caps _Twitter. You just click on that. You should be able to go and get the thing. Or look at him. He's digital. Do the QR code. That's way faster. Way faster.
Yes, let me get my fingers out of the way. So what I did is I actually wore this all the way around Exponential. People were like, well,
what is that?
Yes. Can I scan you, or were you printed digitally, or what is this? And I'm like, no. This is where we really need your input.
That's awesome. That is great. That's cool. So I'll leave this up here for a little bit longer.
Okay. So and I'll bring it back a little later on, because they may not be convinced yet, but I think after they hear the kinds of things you're going to raise, they're going to say, hey, I need to weigh in on that.
Yeah. Chesley's wrong. Let me show him how.
No. Or Chesley's friends are underrepresented. And case in
Oh,
point, remember
yeah.
I gave Chesley some of the early findings, and one of them is, are you an online only church, no physical presence? And like 1% is. And I think there might be more out there. And if that's one of you, I especially need to have your input on how God is working through your church.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is important. Obviously, so you held up the book Viral Churches, and I'm pretty sure Ed Stetzer is not a huge fan of digital only churches, but we'll get him to become a fan later on. I don't know. We'll see. We'll
I
see.
think, okay, I can't speak for Ed,
That's
but
fair.
but I think he is dramatically in favor of global evangelization.
I would agree
And
with that.
anything that God uses to do that is better than not doing it. Like, D.L. Moody, who got criticized for his evangelistic methods, looked the person in the eye and said, okay, I hear you, but I like my methods of doing it better than your methods of not
Not
doing it.
doing it. It's so true. So true. All right. I would love to dig into the findings. Like what I know there was a lot of questions. It takes you about 15 minutes to do the assessment.
And not everybody gets the same questions. It
That
depends
is
on,
true. That is true.
like if you were, okay, I did plant a church, but it closed, or I
Mm.
did plant a church and I'm no longer there. Well, great. You've got the whole scope of your, from beginning to end, or any number of other options. And the same with multi-site. I'm a multi-site director. I oversee a bunch of campuses. I'm the actual campus pastor. So we tried to give the most relevant questions to whatever your role is.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's look at me. I was a replanter for a little while, and
We
then
ask replanters,
yes, you do. And now I'm in digital ministry. It's very different, but and the same all at the same time.
and replanting, we needed to know, did you come with a building and all that? Because
Mhm.
a lot of it is still the same in that, well, I
Yeah.
had 6 people, but did you have some assets that came in with it? Or maybe you had debt that, yes, I got this building, but it's in bad shape. And,
Yeah.
I got to not only pay for the pastoral staff, but we got to pay for getting this building rehabbed.
Yeah. When I walked into that church before we took it over, it was Smurf blue carpet, and the floor was caving in. So,
Yes.
and we didn't even own the building, but we had debt. So it was
Yeah.
a fun few years. Absolutely. So
So if you're a replanter, we want to hear from you too.
that's awesome. That's awesome. But I'm really excited for digital ministry. Obviously, that's kind of the lane I've been in for the last few years. And you had some findings on digital ministry. It's not just church planting, but like this is a piece of the puzzle that people are actually trying to figure out post-COVID. So
Yeah.
what was the things that really stuck out for you?
Okay, so like we give you like 25 words, and we say, so, which of the following do you regularly use to describe your church? And I gave a lot of digital words. I gave hybrid and digital and virtual reality church and augmented church, and because we're that kind of experimentation is getting a lot of buzz. And by the way, churches are doing more innovation and change during these pandemic 2 years, than over the last 20 years combined, because you can just say, well, we couldn't do it, or we needed to, come up with a different solution. And the congregations or your core group or whoever, like, okay, so there is a lot of experimentation. So when we ask, what words do you use? The top 2, I'll tell you, the top one was, this is 2022, not 2010, but the top one was missional.
Mm-hmm.
Missional was the top choice. And the second most choice, and this definitely wouldn't have been 10 years ago, is multi-ethnic.
Mm.
So church plants in particular are leading the ways in pioneering, what society looks like now and will look like. Okay, so let's come to all the online and digital terms. They were all in the 8%, 7%, all the way down to 1%. Then you say, wow, I thought, oh, and I even had words like hybrid. Hybrid was a little higher because, people are trying to do both. But I think that's great, because even if 1% are trying to reach the metaverse, that's another meta church that we put in there as an option. Even if 1% are, that's great. They're the pioneers. They're the front runners. And if they find a breakthrough, then they're going to wave the flag and say, hey, look, I found a great response here. And then lots of other churches are going to say, okay, you led the charge. You found the door opening. Let's go knock on that door and see if we can reach people for Christ that way.
Yeah, I think we're seeing that in the metaverse right now, particularly. Like it's definitely an opportunity. Obviously, Life Church just put out their mod for their blueprints for a digital building in the metaverse, and so I think people going to understand that one a little bit more, because it is a lot like going to a physical building, but in digital spaces on gaming platforms and social media, you can't do church the way you always have done it. And so, let me ask you a question about this. In that particular finding, when they said the top 2 ways to
regularly describe my church,
were these digital planters saying that, or were these all planters saying that?
No, see, this is where all I've done is got the frequencies of everybody.
Yeah.
When I get a lot of people to participate, and that's why I need you folks listening to take the QR code and take the survey, is then I can slice and dice and say, well, what about people who describe their church as a microchurch or as house churches or as a digital church or whatever? Are they different? And I'll do the same for urban versus non-urban, or Canadian versus US. I'm going to do lots of slicing and dicing, and that only works with at least statistical effectiveness if you have a big survey sample. So that's why you're like, wow, you got 2,500 people. Yeah, but I'd like to hit
more.
A lot more. Yeah.
Well, the interesting piece is I'm wondering how many people that are doing digital ministry, digital churches, in church planting, maybe not that you're doing much replanting of digital churches, but those type of leaders, I wonder how many of them are actually identifying as missional or multi-ethnic, rather than digital.
So wouldn't that be interesting to take all the digital family churches and see what other words they use to describe their ministry? Yes. Yeah. That's where I'm going to have fun for a whole month,
right?
Playing with all this.
Yeah, because that's the thing that I would love to do. Like the thing that I love about digital platforms, it is like first century in Acts, right? So you're going out there, you're tilling the ground, you're planting the seeds of the gospel, and you're making disciples, and out of that, a church will grow. It is not mostly setting up shop, hoping a bunch of Christians come to the building. Now you're actually having to go and be on the frontiers and the front lines of making disciples and planting churches.
Well, let me ask you a question in that regard. The joke is that when the pandemic happened, every church became a multi-site church, an online campus and an in-person campus, and the in-person campus was temporarily suspended. So larger churches tended to reach not just their own local area, the parent with the snotty nosed kid who it wasn't a good idea to come anyway, and now we've got the digital option. But here I'm in Japan, and I was wanting to find somewhere to practice my English, and lo and behold, I didn't realize it, but God led me to your website, and I'm now tuning in your church. Well, that's not gonna turn into a physical presence. So more and more churches, I'm wondering, are having this digital group that there's no way they could be physically connected. Where do you see that going because of the pandemic? Has in your view, has indeed that risen as a slice of the church universe and as a missionary outpost, so to speak?
I think it can. I don't know if it's being fully embraced, though. I think, I said this often earlier in the pandemic. I felt like the money to be made in digital ministry would happen after everybody goes back to the building, because there's 2 paradigms at play. The first paradigm is a centralized paradigm where you have to come to something. You have to attract somebody. That's what a building is. It is a centralized paradigm. But our world lives in a decentralized paradigm now. The church hasn't caught up to it yet. And so in a decentralized paradigm, you have all these pockets of people that create an overarching community. And the church hasn't figured that one out yet. Some of them have. The micro church side, the reason why I think they're winning right now and it's becoming more prevalent is because they embrace a decentralized paradigm. The church hasn't learned how to play in that area yet, so it doesn't jive with how they've seen ministry in the past. And so I think as they begin to embrace that new paradigm, you'll see more adoption of those type of things in the future. But until then, I don't know.
Very, very helpful. And by micro church, are you referring to where the groups are more the core of the church, where the life of the church happens, and less the corporate gathering, which doesn't even happen that often? And then typically there's a separate leaders gathering.
Yeah, so Casey Underground is a good example of this with Rob over there and his guys. Like, so there's a couple ways of doing this. In a centralized paradigm, you have one gathering for as many people as possible. In a decentralized paradigm, you're building a community of a bunch of different gatherings. And yes, you have a centralized one for leaders, and then out of that, you decentralize and let them lead their own spaces. I think Jason Shepherd does a pretty good job of this. They're a hybrid model where they still do the weekly, but they are really operating in a decentralized paradigm. So there are an ability for prevailing model churches right now to begin to shift and start thinking in that regard. And there's multiple ways of doing it. I think what they're afraid of, I mean, in Kansas City, even their leadership is decentralized, so they don't have like one like lead pastor, if you will. They have a team-based ministry approach. But who's to say that a prevailing model church with a lead pastor couldn't adopt the decentralized paradigm? I think Judah Smith is doing that pretty well, right, over at Church Home in Seattle. So you see those at play. I think that's where everybody's going to go to. It's not so much the digital platforms. The digital platforms are an enabling connection with us so that we can decentralize. But the digital is not the point. Like whether you're on Twitch, whether you're on Facebook, whether you're on alt space on the metaverse, that's not that big of a deal. That's like somebody having church in a coffee shop. Now it's big enough that they could even disperse even in there. And now you're looking at time zones as a dispersal rate for decentralized communities. It's all about building communities rather than a crowd. I hope I didn't go too long on that, but no. I think that's the paradigm shift.
I wake up in the morning wanting to learn from people like you, not to hear people like me talk of stuff I already know or I'm learning. So thank you. That was really helpful. Really helpful.
Yeah, I'm excited about it though, because it's going to change the way we do church. And it's that little shift. We moved from a global diaspora and local ecclesias when COVID happened, and this accelerated the change. And now we are a global ecclesia with a bunch of local diasporas. And so
I had 2,500 plus people take the survey so far, and anticipating that, across 50 denominations, we'd have a big response. I minimized the number of open-ended questions so that I could mathematically tally. But I did have one open-ended question. And it was after I talked about different strategies of in-person, online, combination of in-person, online, leaders-only meeting. I then say, does the model of your church, is it different from anything described above? And if so, would you please explain? And out of 2,500 responses, 154 so far have said, yep, my model is different. Now, I haven't unpacked it yet to know whether, you could have fit in, one of these other categories, or whether, like you've just been describing, there are others who say, no, we're not quite like that. That doesn't, those categories don't work for us, as they're trying to move to a more decentralized model. So I'm just eager to see what those pioneers are doing out there.
Yeah, me too. I think you're going to have some guys like I know Casey Underground, they do Discovery Bible studies. They don't have a main teacher. There's going to be some people that move on that. There's going to be other people that say, no, we want a main teacher. So how do we do that? So you're going to have these instances of differing methodologies, but it's all built around this new paradigm that digital has allowed us to have with decentralization. I think that's the big piece here. People think digital and they get overwhelmed. But
Now,
go ahead.
I'll tell you another thing that's going to come up. We're going to learn in the survey as more and more digital people take the survey, and that is we ask about funding. Where do you come from as the church planter or church planting team member, and how are you funded? How is your ministry funded? And I'm wondering if the patterns, if I can get enough digital only responses, if the patterns there are different from anything else, because you still got to put food on the table at home. Do we have a bunch of bivocational or co-vocational people doing digital ministry? Are they doing it as a staff member of an existing church and kind of doing just a separate ministry on the side? How is it all fitting together? Do you have any hunch, Chesley, of what you think I'm going to learn?
You're going to learn that most of them are Covo.
So
bivocational is people that are doing a job that wish they didn't have one. Co-vocational are people that are doing a job because they feel like it's part of their mission. And so you're going to see a lot more marketplace leaders that are pastors and leaders of these smaller churches. Some of them will go larger. There's a couple reasons for that. One, the money issue is tight in digital spaces and disruptive spaces as a whole. If you look at Clayton Christensen and what he talks about in The Innovator's Dilemma, the reality is when you're disrupting, there's not a lot of money, and the prevailing model is never really excited about you usurping and disrupting their current model. So they're not going to invest in it. And so I think there's some people that, there's like, if I can apply this in the marketplace, HP had two different printers. They had the old laser and then the inkjet. Well, they created two subsidiary companies so that one can disrupt the market. And as the laser printer declined in popularity, and as the inkjet printer went up, like HP as a company would be able to still ride the wave because they had two subsidiaries, one that was allowed to disrupt and the other one that was allowed to decline, but the overall shareholders wouldn't feel the difference.
There's a lot of metaphors or analogies you could draw to innovation in the church from that story.
It's very true. And so I think right now, if you're by yourself on the cutting edge, you're not getting funding. And so you've got to figure out how to be sustainable. And right now that is small, adaptable, lightweight, and reproducible. How can you be reproducible if you're asking money from people that aren't Christians? Well, you got to have a job. You got to have a job. So
let me ask you about another of the findings that I sent you. We ask people, okay, for whatever you do online, what platform do you use? And number one was Facebook. Number two, YouTube. Number three was your church's website. After those, and then outside things like CHOP, the Life Church model that they offer, I think is currently in fourth place. So does it surprise you that Facebook and YouTube are ahead of the church website?
I'm going to get in trouble as I answer that question. No, it doesn't surprise me. And here's why. The multitude of people that took your test are in a prevailing model church with a centralized platform.
Okay.
They're thinking they should be on Facebook because every one of their friends are on Facebook.
Yeah.
That's not where most people are. Facebook last year had a decline in user minutes. You know where they're at? TikTok, Instagram, Twitch, like some of these other, I'm guessing most of the people that took your assessment didn't even know what Twitch is.
Yeah.
And so you're like, those are gamers, but there's other people like TikTok. How do you do a message in 30 seconds? That's a very different model. And so, and they're thinking, well, I can't build a community on there. That may be right. But so what they're doing is they're creating what they know, because Facebook is the dominant force, has been for decades. And so we got to get online. So that means we got to be on Facebook. YouTube is a different animal, because YouTube is a search engine. So you should be on YouTube. That should be where your big stuff stays. And then you cut your big stuff into little stuff so you can be on social media platforms all over. Not every church has the ability to do that. So if you are doing that, pick one with the people that you want to reach. They didn't ask the very important question, is where are the people that I'm trying to reach at? Just assume they're on Facebook or YouTube. And it doesn't surprise me that they're on their website, because we got to get online. So it's got to be my website. Well, what happens if the unchurched person that like you're trying to reach doesn't go to your website? Well, the reality is they don't go to your website. They go to TikTok to be entertained. They go to Instagram Reels to be entertained, and they go to Twitch to hang out with their friends and play games with them and watch content. We put them in the wrong places because we want to say we're relevant, but the reality is we haven't done the homework to say where are the people that God's called us to reach at, and go do that and figure out how to do that well. So I told you I'm going to get in trouble for that one.
No, that was articulate and passionate. And let me just throw in that with my ECFA hat, Evangelical Council for Financial Accountability, last year I did a survey of fundraising nonprofits, Christ-centered nonprofits, otherwise known as stewardship in church context. And I asked for your social media, where all do you seek to cultivate new donors? And I gave about 8 to 10 platforms, including Twitch, TikTok, and Instagram, you name it. And to my surprise, Facebook was one, Instagram was two. That didn't surprise me. But then the drop off for everything else, I think Twitter might have been third, was just next to nothing, which says that they weren't even experimenting, or they weren't saying, oh, we did this, could we adapt the format a little bit and put it on TikTok, which at the time was a much shorter allowance for video.
Yeah. So the interesting piece about that is, if you post on Facebook, they have a mechanism within Facebook that allow you to post to Instagram. Yeah. So they could probably say both, even though they were only on one actually cultivating. Yeah. But here's the other piece to that. So social media is really broken down in generational gaps.
Yes.
So if you look at older millennials like me, who came in when Mark Zuckerberg was doing it with college buddies, like you still had to have a friend in college invite you when I got on. And so is MySpace and Facebook then. So you have older millennials, and then guess what happened? Their parents got on. Well, their parents now are grandparents. And so these grandparents are now sitting on, the majority of them, on Facebook. And what happened was there was a migration from Facebook to Instagram with millennials. Well, the same thing happened again when you had Snapchat and TikTok. Same thing. The younger generation doesn't want to be where the older generation is. They want to make their own space. And so now when I see people on Facebook building community, what they're doing? They're building community with people their age. And so they're not building community with people lower than them. So we've had this segmented generational gap. And so you have to communicate differently to a different generation. And then we didn't even talk about Patreon and Kickstarter. If you're going to fundraise, why aren't you on those spaces? Those are where you can get the majority. I mean, they're built as community drivers with network effects for fundraising as their core interaction. None of the other ones are.
And interestingly, I read the Chronicle of Philanthropy and stuff like that. And they just in recent years have incorporated the Kickstarter type websites as one of their fundraising channels that they research. So, and noticing that, of course, it's a rapidly growing one.
Well, and giving is going to change. It's going to change the game. You have micro donations that can be done through Patreon and there's some really great apps. Roundup is another one where you do micro donations, but then you got Kickstarter where you can actually build campaigns. and actually start funding through that. Millennials and Gen Z love to give to projects and to people. They don't love to give to buildings. They want to help people. And so if you're saying, hey, the vision for us is to be in a building, they're like, we don't care about that. Or give us money because we need to handle our overhead. They don't care about that. But they'll put money towards a mission every time, especially if they know like buying a cup of coffee will help take care of people in Ukraine during the war. Man, that they'll give to that all day long. Yeah. So I think we need to rethink giving in that. So yeah, as I'm looking through, the responses, you showed me some of the percentages, the full list of responsible today to the question today, how are you currently meeting online during a typical month? And so corporate worship was first by a long shot, 63%. Small groups that include Bible study, one another prayer and fellowship, that was 44. And then the staff and leadership team. Okay, yeah, 44%. Yes. Staff and leadership team meeting on a typical month is 36. Well, that's easier because it's Zoom now, right? Prayer teams, but there's a drop off to show that they haven't quite figured out decentralized paradigm. They're all still stuck in the centralized paradigm. And so I think that's the flip that churches need to make. And I think digital pastors that are on these platforms get it intuitively. Younger people get it intuitively. But there's a shift that has to go in prevailing model churches that say, hey, this is not about the building anymore. It's about community building. That's where we need to go. And that looks like a decentralized. You become a mayor of a town, if you will, in that regard. You have a community of communities rather than trying to fit everybody in an arena. And so it's a shift that we're going to have to live into a lot more.
Yes, and having friends online that not the Facebook definition of friend because you just click it, but someone that you truly have a meaningful relationship with that you've never met in person.
Yeah, I have plenty of those in multiple different countries. And so what I like to say is digital relationship leads to physical relationship. It does. It goes the other way around. What we've done is we've created a dichotomy between the two. And the reality is that's not true. So I think how you and I met in person, by the way, now we're digital. You had talked about, do you do digital church only? And I said, well, that's kind of a difficult question to ask, because the reality is I'm never just digital as a person. I'm sitting in my chair in Phoenix, Arizona, having a digital conversation with Warren, who is online, and he's also offline with wherever you live at, And so the truth is we're digital and physical beings completely. And Gen Z understands this, but Gen Xers on up don't. They can't get it. They have the dichotomy built in to their lives, whereas younger generations don't. We're not asking the question, are you digital only? That's not the right question. Yes, we're in person and we're, IRL and URL, if you will.
I think I first realized that when I was doing a multi-site project, and I was in a different town, and I visited 3 churches that were all multi-sites on one Sunday morning. I go to a recovery group for people who visit too many thriving or growing churches. And now I'm doing the write-up, and I'm having to think, well, was the pastor at, the first church I visited there in person, or was the message by video screen? And I had to sit and pause for a few minutes to think about that. And then I thought, this really works well, that I had no registration of one being inferior to the other or different or limited, that I can't even remember. And that was my kind of entrance to realizing, we are entering a world ahead that is truly blurred.
Yeah, what's crazy is, you were on the forefront of the multi-site movement, right? You with Leadership Network back in the day, and the truth of the matter is, we've been working towards decentralization for a while. Yeah. That was a decentralized, centralized model. Now what we're talking about is a centralized, decentralized model. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I just so appreciate the way you have terms for that. And what happens in a movement is you have experimenters, and then when some patterns emerge, somebody puts a name on it that makes sense. I still remember being at one of the earliest multi-site meetings, and campus pastor, none of those words existed, but one pastor said, they were talking about, well, how do you deal with, it's always a different person every week. And that pastor said, we have a face with the place. And you could almost hear a pin drop with all these other pastors in the room thinking, that's it. That's how to solve that problem of everybody feeling second-class chopped liver, for going to the overflow room. That word was still being used. We're going to have a face with a place, and that ultimately became campus pastor. And by the way, in the survey, we asked, do you like campus pastor, location pastor, or site pastor? And those are the words in that order, with campus pastor by far being the more chosen. But what you've just said is you're now putting words to describe what's happening, and as a clear picture emerges, then people say, oh, I like, as you said earlier, the Kansas City underground model, and enough people know that becomes a point of reference. And then the funny thing is, as a movement develops, is you have a standardization. Early in the multi-site movement, just for an analogy, it was the Starbucks model of we put the napkins just like this, we do it. And then once you kind of had this uniformity, then people said, well, but our campus across town is in a Latino community, and could we do Latino music and it still be us, and could we do this? And the boundaries began to, and likewise, everybody called it campus pastor at first. And then it's like, once we now all know what that is and understand how it's different, it's not an MC, it's not this, it is that. Then we say, well, why do we have to call it that? Why don't we call it a location pastor? Why don't we just call it the pastor? Why don't we just muddy the waters? So you're helping give definition and framework to something that is bubbling up and emerging, and that's a good thing. And when enough people say, oh, I know what you mean by having a decentralization inside of a centralized model versus the opposite of centralization within a decentralized model, they'll say, oh, of course I know what you mean. Right now, too many people need those models and word pictures. And just one more observation about the process of change. We all need those models to work from. That is so, you can write the most brilliant book in the world, but people need to see a picture of it and say, oh, I get it now. I went there. I saw how they did it. And now everything else makes more sense.
Yes, that's true. And I think a good example of that would be First Capital Christian in Indiana. Tyler Sansom is the pastor. They're doing a great job at that. They have the megachurch model, the attractional based model, as well as the decentralized model, and they're doing some really cool, innovative stuff with that model, and they're blending it. And what you're going to find is later on, there's not going to be a distinguishment between the two. And I actually think this is a big deal for churches, because what decentralization does is it makes us double down on discipleship. So in a decentralized model, the core product is people development. In a centralized model, the core product is the content. Well, you know what happens if your core product is the content online? You get drowned out by Netflix and all the other stuff. But what doesn't happen is some people are looking for development and they're looking for community. And the reality is they're never going to go into community without somebody providing value for them, which is development. We want transformation in their lives. And I think most churches don't know how to even define discipleship, let alone have a system for it.
Yeah.
And so go ahead.
I think the pandemic caused that question to be asked more and more. The assumption had been, Well, if they're there in our worship service week after week, then and faithfully coming and tuned in, then they must be growing as disciples.
Yeah. Can I get in trouble again?
Yeah, let's get in trouble again.
We mistook assimilation for transformation. It's a problem. It's a problem.
Oh, we mistook assimilation for transformation. Well said. And I think we assumed certain things could happen or would happen in the big gathering that just can't. Just a quick case in point. My wife and I lead a couples. Our pastor asked us to do a marriage couples small group. Awesome. And to our surprise, we opened the door and 13 couples signed up. So now how are we going to do this? And so we thought, well, we'll have one in-person kickoff meeting and one happily ever after married meeting in person, but all the lessons will be on Monday nights on Zoom. Well, and it's couples of the Old Testament. We're looking at, Adam and Eve, the blame game. How did they deal with blame, and what can we learn about not blaming our spouses? So this week was Hannah and Elkanah about disappointment, waiting on God, and in Hannah's case, the baby that she couldn't get pregnant. Well, as we then applied it about couples helping each other deal with disappointment, the overriding example in our group was couples that couldn't have a baby or couldn't have more than one child and all, and being able to tell their story in the listening of a handful of trusted, highly trusted, what's said here stays here, we say every week, friends. When it was over, my wife and I, and we debrief with our apprentices afterwards. It's like, wow, that was not only a holy moment, but something occurred in discipleship there that could not happen in the big group, as powerful as the preaching of the Word of God in a one-way direction without response beyond amen can do. Yeah. And that was a reminder to us that the platform really matters and that God can use the digital platform.
Yeah. We have been face to stage for so long, we've forgotten what face to face really looks like. And I think that's been the difficulty is in a centralized paradigm. When you disciple somebody, guess what happens when somebody hits full maturity? Well, they go do what Jesus called them to do. And in a centralized paradigm, that means they're not contributing necessarily to the butts, the budgets, and the buildings. That doesn't have to happen, but in a centralized paradigm, that's what they felt. And so in a decentralized paradigm, there was no way to connect. So for a church that's in a prevailing model, decentralization meant disconnection. And because of that, we want to keep people here because we want to build community. But by doing so, we're actually building a crowd. And we're keeping people from their masterpiece mission. And so, and with discipleship and a decentralized model, now you're finding what they do best in the body of Christ. Thank you, Bruce Bugby. And you launch them into what God has for them. What's their passion, gifts, personal style, but you never lose connection with them. Because now they're attached to the two group system, one where they're learning as a leader and one where they're leading as a leader. And in that space, now you're building robust community, whether you have a big group or a small group. And each gathering is needed. But let's be honest, you don't have to have a huge gathering every week of the year. Even football, they don't go on, 52 weeks out of the year. They go on 16 plus the playoffs. Why? Because you need a break from the big stuff. And so the small stuff is where it's matter. If you're just doing the big games every day, that's not where you grow. Where you grow is in working on the fundamentals of passing and catching and running. Same thing with the faith. You do that in small groups.
So speaking of small groups, let me ask how you would reshape my metaphor for a digital context.
Okay.
Now, the background is I did this survey of megachurches just before the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to hold up the chart. We asked the question, how central are small groups to your strategy of spiritual formation and discipleship? Well, you don't get much more core of a question than that. I'm going to hold it up on the screen, the chart from our report. And if you want to download the whole report, just go to ecfa.org/surveys, plural, and
Yeah.
download it. Now look at 90%. This was done every 5 years.
Yeah.
So in 2000, only 50%, and then 81%, and now 90% in 2020 say that small groups are central to their strategy of spiritual formation and discipleship. So now here's my metaphor in that context, and I want to see how you'd recast it for a digital world. I've said church is much like a football game. There's the excitement of the big crowd when, there are 50,000 people in the stadium or however many. But if you go all alone, it's miserable. But if you go with a bunch of friends and you tailgate together and you sit by each other and you high five each other and you talk about the play together, then you're connected within, and it doesn't matter how big the thing around you gets, because you've got your identity is not in the whole, your identity is in the group. And that's how large churches grow.
Mm-hmm.
That their identity is in the group within the whole. And so they're thrilled when more people add to the excitement.
Yes.
Recast that for a digital context, a decentralized context.
Well, it's still the truth. So you still got to have a central identity, so that if I'm in Phoenix and somebody else is in Ohio, we're still one. So this is a movement of us going in a lot of us going in a central direction. So now, as we're no longer authority figures like we would be in a centralized context, now we're movement leaders and we're relational leaders that have a role, but we're not the ones that are the end all be all. Actually, decision making ends up happening at the lowest level possible. So you have these small groups that are doing span of care, but they're also development. And then you have these hubs of developmental teams that are helping train people to go become everything they can be and work on their masterpiece mission. So
and what is the hub in the football game analogy? Is there one?
Yeah, it's the coaching staff.
Oh, okay.
So most of the time people think the hub is the arena, but it's not. It's the actual coaching staff that is building the team. Now you have team captains. Team captains are the ones that actually run the team. And then the coaching staff runs the team captains, so that the mission and the vision can cascade throughout each position group, using football as an analogy. So it's still the same approach, outside of the fact that there's very little hierarchy at this point. So that's what decentralization has done. We've actually created a different level of hierarchy, saying, as a low level leader, as a ruler of 10, if you will, using Jethro's language, you have a lot of authority, and the things that you can't do, like, then bump it up. But we're going to push down the level of authority and care onto those lower level leaders. And so that, people want to be a part of something. They want to have impact. And so, and what it does is it allows us to reproduce a lot faster. So a leader that has a specific mission for a homeless population, or maybe it's their business partners, they're going to create different looking things based off of what God's called them to do, but they have now responsibility and authority to care for them. I'm not going to be able to do that, but I'm going to be able to take care of him while he's taking care of them, resource them with the right systems in place that he couldn't do by himself, which is why you need giving. So it looks a lot more like a network than it does a centralized platform. Every once in a while, you come back and you do the arena. Then it gets really fun, because it's empowering and it's enlivening the fact that, oh, we aren't alone. This is actually all of us together. And as we grow, it becomes a movement. It's Amway for Jesus is literally the best way I can put it.
Well, and a lot of times you hear in church, big church, someone say, well, all we're doing is coming together to celebrate all that God's been doing in your lives during the week. But often that's hollow in that, no, I'm here to be revved up. And, the majority of my spiritual growth is going to occur today, didn't occur during the week.
So I can get through my week. Yeah. You got to flip the model. You have to flip it on its head. It's exactly backwards of what the prevailing model of church has done. And so, we're going, no, now we're truly celebrating. You're not reliant on me for your maturity in the faith.
Yeah.
You're partners with me in it.
Chesley, I have learned so much from you. This has been great. And when assuming we get enough responses from our digital only friends, I'm happy to come back and drill down on what we learned from you. I see you put the link back up there too.
I did.
As we're on our final minutes here, is there anything of the materials I sent you and that preview of the initial findings, that first look? Is there anything else that you want to comment on or ask about?
Yeah. So did anybody talk about the fact that they were doing something other than the worship service online? Was there a question in there about that? Because I don't remember that at all.
What would an example be of what you're doing online?
Yeah. So maybe a podcast or a show rather than a worship service.
Well, we do have an other in that long list of about 20 things. Do you do counseling? Do you do pastoral care? Do you do the prayer groups? Do you do your church board? We ask all of that, and then we say, other, is there something else? And I only have a few others in the survey, so I will be sure and monitor those to see what creative ideas, like podcast, that people have named.
Yeah, my hunch is that the corporate, what we know as the corporate worship service that is built for a live experience, is going to be less and less prevalent online. They're going to find its usefulness is not working. I think that's the prevailing model churches that have went through COVID. They realize like our viewership is waning in that area. And I think the reason is because it's not built for a screen. It's built for a live experience, and we're just broadcasting.
Yeah.
Maybe, just maybe, the whole goal of digital discipleship and digital decentralized community is that process to build transformation, not necessarily the event that we've spent a lot of time on. And so I don't know. I would love to see what that looks like.
Good word. Well, I just want to cheer your explorations, your thinking. You're anchored in Scripture and trying to say, what is the church, and yet what are all the things we've added to it, and assume that's necessary. From podiums to face to stage approaches. That those parts are not in the Bible. Not that they're bad, but what could be. So thank you. Keep dreaming, and thank you for letting me be part of this. And thank you for understanding my, ironically, technology problem and getting on to talk about.
No, it's okay. It's great. Warren, I appreciate you, man. Where could we find you online if we wanted to get some more info about what you're doing?
I'm identically, whatever I post on LinkedIn, I also post on Twitter. So, and Twitter's at Warren Bird is one word. I do for the few who may be listening to this, a large church trends blog for ECFA. And I do a steady stream of reports through ECFA. So if you just go to ecfa.org/pulse, you'll get the church related newsletter, and that will tell you lots of practical stuff that will help you not get in trouble financially, administratively. Like recently we just did a webinar, one of our more popular, on how do you set up cyber currency giving for your church, and we nicknamed it Granny has been investing in Bitcoin and now wants to give a whole lot to her church. Can you help her do it? And we walked through, the three of the better ways to do so. So there's a whole lot of resources there at ecfa.org/pulse.
Yep.
And if you take the survey, then you will get a free copy of the findings. And that will be a wonderful thing for me, for the kingdom of God, and hopefully coming back to you.
Absolutely. Warren, this has been wonderful. Oh, by the way, Kenny Jang says, hi, Warren.
Hey,
So,
Kenny, long time no see. I saw
Yeah.
your comment there, and I didn't know how this is a new platform for me. And I
yeah,
didn't know how to reply back. But
we just say
Kenny,
hi on here. It's live. Why
good
not?
man.
Yeah. All right, Warren, you have a great day, man. I had fun. Let's do this again soon, man.
Let me say a prayer before we
Yes,
break.
sir. All right.
Lord, there are all these scriptures about the words of our heart and the meditations, and may they bring you glory. And I just pray that anything that was good, that you want to just have someone wrestle with, that'll stick. And anything that's just not healthy or not for a certain setting at this point of time, that it will be passed by. I pray your blessing on Chesley and the many ways he is pioneering to help us reach people and make disciples of Jesus Christ. In his name we pray. Amen.
Amen. All right. Thanks, man. Appreciate
All
it.
right. Thanks so much.